Before we dive into this discussion, comment where you're watching from. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. This clip focuses on a heated debate over the Trump administration's reported $1.80 billion compensation fund for certain January 6th defendants who claim they were treated unfairly by the Justice Department. The discussion quickly shifts to a broader question. If compensation is appropriate in that situation, should similar arguments apply to other forms of reparations? Scott Jennings is challenged directly on that comparison, and the exchange becomes a debate about fairness, accountability, and political consistency. Let's watch the clip and then break down both sides of the argument.
For Abby Phillip, tonight, President Trump wants to reward his friends and some of his most notorious supporters with cash, using your tax dollars. It is a deal worked out between the Justice Department and the IRS to settle Trump's lawsuits over leaks and claims of unfair treatment. A so-called anti-weaponization fund has been set up to dole out the money to pay Trump's allies who claim they were unfairly targeted by previous administrations. The amount? $1.776 billion, a symbolic nod, of course, to the adoption of the Declaration of Independence. By the way, it is possible the money that's in that fund could be tapped by January 6th rioters.
This is reimbursing people that were horribly treated, horribly treated. It's anti-weaponization. They've been weaponized. They've been, in some cases, imprisoned wrongly. They paid legal fees that they didn't have. They've gone bankrupt. Their lives have been destroyed. And they turn out to be right.
Now, the DOJ says anyone with a claim can file for an apology and a monetary settlement. The settlement says there are no partisan requirements. A group of 5 people will gatekeep the money, and the Attorney General will pick them. In this case, that's Todd Blanche, Trump's former personal lawyer. But the president will have the ultimate power to fire any of the gatekeepers. The DOJ claims Trump himself will not receive any payments, but he will get a formal apology. We've got a lot of folks at the table, and this is going to be hot sauce, I can tell already, with the size and the arm crossing. So we're going to start with you, Ms. Anna Navarro. Is this a slush fund to appease his buddies, or is there something that is legitimate going on here?
And the other part you forgot to mention is that there's going to be no transparency, according to them. That they're not going, right, that they're not going to know. We, the taxpayer who are paying for this, are not going to know who this is going to. This is so bad. It is so bad. It's so bad prima facie. It's just bad on its face. But then when you put it in context, in the fact that Americans can't afford gas, Americans can't afford groceries, farmers are going bankrupt all over this country. We are in the middle of a war that's now cost $50 billion. He wants $1.5 billion for a ballroom. He wants hundreds of millions of dollars for an arch. He wants $15 million to paint the reflecting pool. And then you put on top of that now a $1.7 billion slush fund to pay his supporters and the people who feel victimized. I mean, I'm so old. I remember when most Republicans used to balk and be shocked and outraged by the idea of reparations to people who suffered slavery. But we're going to be giving money to January 6th insurrectionists. That part's okay. Yeah, it's disgusting.
Scott, is this reparations?
Look, I think there's a lot about it we don't know. I don't know who's on the committee. I don't know exactly who's going to be applying for it.
The people that Trump approves.
Well, they say anybody can apply for it, and, you know, I don't think...
Okay, I'll apply for it. You think I'll get it?
Have you ever been unfairly targeted by the Department of Justice?
I have been unfairly targeted by this administration, yeah.
Have you been unfairly prosecuted by the Department of Justice?
Are those the people that are going to be in this
So the answer is no, you haven't. So the issue is, the question is, has anyone in the history of the United States ever been unfairly targeted by the Department of Justice? Of course they have, and there ought to be, just at a top line, a way for people to seek recourse if they have been unfairly targeted. That having been said, this all started by the fact that Donald Trump had his tax returns unfairly and illegally leaked by the IRS. That's where all this started, and he was initially seeking damages for that, which he has given up. He'll receive no money, as I understand it, and now it has morphed into this idea that there have been people that have been unfairly targeted. All of this makes me a little uncomfortable because it's a lot of money and it didn't go through the U.S. Congress. That's number one. Number two, I don't want to see a president necessarily handpicking people to get payments where he could be accused of just picking people out who are political allies. But do I want a world where if you've been unfairly targeted by the federal government and it was truly unfair and you truly had something done to you that should not have been done, do I think people should be able to seek recourse for that? Absolutely I do, because I think it probably happens, and not on a partisan basis, but it probably happens all the time. And I think people ought to be able to seek some sort of damages if they've been unfairly targeted by the department or by the federal government.
Does that mean like James Comey or Tish
Right.
James?
I mean, I guess the question is, you know, you've got this. The overarching thing that has people really riled is the January 6 rioters, some of whom pled guilty. I was in one of the trials for the Proud Boys and for the Oath Keepers, and I watched the whole thing, and I watched it play out, and it played out as any justice, any trial would play out. And here they're pardoned, and they could seek money, should they be able to.
My personal view is anybody who committed documented violence against the government or against police officers, you know, they've not been unfairly treated. If they ended up being convicted of a crime because of violence they committed, you know, I got no real sympathy for them. Now, if there were people who were on the periphery that were swept up, over prosecuted, whatever, and they have a way to seek, a recourse here, I have less of a problem with that. But I draw the line at violence. If you've committed political violence, if you attack the government building, if you attack police officers, I got real no sympathy.
Scott, you don't have a problem with Todd Blanche handpicking 5 people who Trump can fire at any moment and giving reparations that are then not disclosed to the American people who are paying for this slush fund?
Why do you know it's not going to be disclosed?
Because because it says so.
Is it to be public in whole or in part?
I mean, kind of like, like I have an issue with the...
So wait, it is going to be public?
Public in whole or in part.
So this is not a true attack.
There are parts that they could redact, is what you say, not disclose.
You mean like the
it's not private from the judge.
I think that's a great example.
Look, I'll just
I have an issue with the congressional slush fund that has paid out.
I agree with you. That's all done in secret.
Sexual claims with our taxpayer
funds. That's all done in
secret.
Don't know
I agree. Right. And that should be transparent. It is shameful that it's not. It is ridiculous that we are even considering this in any way a right thing to do.
Look, I think transparency is important, and I'll
yes,
but I do think partisanship aside, politics aside, people are often, will be treated unfairly by the federal government and the Department of Justice. There were certainly people during the Biden years, pro-lifers sitting, praying quietly on sidewalks who were treated unfairly. So, look, I don't think we could say the federal government and the Department of Justice is perfect. It is not perfect. And if somebody did have something happen to them that's unfair, are you saying they shouldn't be able to petition their government for some sort of recourse here? Because I do believe that.
But
now, whether the fund is the right thing,
they can't.
I don't know.
At a state level, at a federal level, people who have been unjustly targeted. I mean, we see it all the time with people who've spent, I don't know, decades in prison, and it turns out that they are innocent.
It happens.
And then all of a sudden they get out. They're proven innocent, and they are given reparations.
But this fund will not be for those people.
Cornel West, how do you see this? I mean, could the King family come back after what happened to Dr. Martin Luther King being jailed? I mean, how do you see this playing out?
Well, first, I just want to salute you, Sister Sarah. First time I get a chance to meet you, high-quality journalists, just like you and Abby. It's high quality. It's always a blessing. But I just want to hear my dear brother Scott try to rationalize this in some way, and I see you're getting checkmated here, because there's just no grounds for justification of this unless you open the gates and you got trillions of dollars for ex-slaves and ex-Jim Crow people. You got 6,000 of the Innocence Project just at Harvard Law School of people who've been incarcerated, and you got 2.2 of mass incarceration. I've been blessed to teach in prison for 49 years. Now, tomorrow is Malcolm X's birthday. He's 101. What is it about Malcolm? Well, what we're talking about is this is just the peak of an iceberg. When you're living in an empire that is unraveling because the hatred and the greed is overwhelming. And so there's no sincerity, there's no integrity, there's no character. So people will justify anything in the name of power and might as opposed to integrity and what is right. That's a spiritual crisis. That's a moral crisis. Malcolm X was right about that. I was glad to see his face on that magnificent banner down there in Alabama when they marched in Selma and Montgomery. Martin was there, Fannie Lou Hamer was there. But it's not a question of skin pigmentation. It's a question of character, integrity, and the attempt to do what is right. There's no integrity in justifying $1.8 billion of people who engaged in criminal activity actually kill some policemen. And they get compensated, they get reparations, and black folk, indigenous folk, other folk, unfair, even white brothers and sisters who have gone to jail innocent, who deserve some kind of accountability. There's no way you can justify this. But this is just one peak of an iceberg. What we're seeing is spiritual sickness, moral decrepitude, and political corruption on steroids. But the good news is you still got folk in the country who are trying to exemplify some integrity and character and courage.
Peter, is there, and to you also, Sabrina, is there a way to fight this? Because there has to be someone who's injured by this, right? So that the public, the general public, who can say, hey, these are my tax dollars, they're not really considered victims.
If only the taxpayers had a claim against frivolous spending by the government. That would be a wonderful thing to have. No, I mean, the Trump administration is going about this all wrong. The way you're supposed to do is you're supposed to have folks set up a nonprofit, and then you either have a company do the third-party payments into the federal government for leniency, or you just allocate tax dollars from like the Inflation Reduction Act, and that goes to your political allies. That's how you button it up, you make it legal, and you avoid all of this. But to your point, like on the historic discrimination, I mean, there was $2 billion in the Inflation Reduction Act that was allocated for black farmers in the South who had been historically discriminated against by the USDA. Like, there have been tons of programs that have done this. I think there's a very legitimate claim, and let's be very clear, I agree with Scott. We're not talking about, and if they are, I condemn it, money going to folks who violently assaulted police officers. I know folks who were at January 6th, broke no laws except they were on the side of an invisible line, did not enter any building, were not violent, you know, whose lives were upended and ruined, where other folks who were maybe not of the same political persuasion, who had committed, you know, similar minor offenses, weren't even charged or didn't even have those charges brought up. So I think it's important that there is parity, and if there was an overcorrection or an over, exertion in one direction, that tilt back towards the center.
Can I just say that we're talking about nearly $1.8 billion to the same president that said the U.S. government can't afford to pay for Medicare, Medicaid, child care, or daycare. So I think there are a lot of, and now you have on top of that the gas crisis where people are paying, over $1.50 than they were before the war started. So I think when you look at this giant slush fund of money, I think people are going to look at that and say, well, what about me? What can the government do for me? And this is not going to benefit people. So I think
when did he say we can't afford Medicare or Medicaid?
He said they've cut it, and he also
for non-citizens.
We
can't afford it for non-Americans.
He did say
we can't
that we cannot afford Medicare and Medicaid, and that should be pushed to the states to pay for, and that the federal government could further subsidize. But he did also say that the federal government cannot afford daycare and childcare for millions of families all around the country. So I think when you look at a slush fund of this magnitude, people rightfully are thinking that's absolutely egregious. I mean, it is.
But does everybody here agree generally that it is possible for the federal government and the Department of Justice to make a mistake?
Absolutely.
Sure. Yes.
But not just a mistake, it can be chronic. It can be institutional.
I totally agree with you. So if we all agree that mistakes can be made,
that's right.
Do we all also agree that maybe it ought to be, there ought to be a way for people to address those mistakes? I personally think there ought to be.
Absolutely. That's why I've supported reparations for black people for the last 50 years.
With transparency and a board that's not appointed by the president.
That's what the argument is.
Well, I mean,
what do you mean why? Like, it's not an impartial board.
Why would the executive branch not be involved in the administration of it if it's coming out of the Department of Justice?
I think what you were arguing was transparency, so that we know where the money goes.
I agree with that.
Right.
So if you know where the money goes and you know what the details of the cases are, then maybe you could pick each individual case apart. Peter is right. There were some people who did terrible things, committing violence against cops, terrible. But there were some people who got swept up in things, dramatically overcharged, and they weren't treated the same as people who got into similar situations under other administrations. That's absolutely also true. Should they not have a way to get their lives back?
But it's also true that the first act that this man did as president is issue a blanket amnesty and pardon for all of them. Not look at it case by case, not look at the ones that have been violent against police, which you say you condemn, but do it in a blanket fashion. And so that's not a good precedent for somebody who wants to issue reparations to people from January 6th.
I mean, they have been pardoned, so technically they could file for this and potentially get money, and there's a lot there. So we'll have to wait and see what this happens. But if we don't know who's getting it, then no one's going to understand exactly who is getting a piece of the pie. There's a lot of questions here. I think
I love transparency.
We haven't even talked about the constitutionality of it. You alluded to it. Congress has the power of the purse.
It is a question. It is a question. Agreed.
It's a big one.
And that's really the heart of this debate. Critics argue there's an inconsistency in supporting compensation for some January 6th defendants while opposing other forms of reparations, including those related to the legacy of slavery. Supporters of the administration, however, contend that these are fundamentally different legal and policy questions. That's the disagreement at the center of this exchange. More broadly, the conversation raises bigger questions about government priorities, public spending, and who should receive compensation from taxpayer funds. Those are issues that continue to divide Americans across the political spectrum. What do you think? Is this a fair comparison, or are these two completely different situations? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss the next one.